Well, hi and welcome to this introduction to the Future Literacies Framework. And I'm going to spend about 25 minutes with you going through the why of the framework, as well as the sub-elements, how they fit together, and also what it can mean for you. Now, this is a framework that I started developing in 2017 after realizing that there's huge changes coming, a massive transition that all of us are going to live through. It's partly around the impact that artificial intelligence and robotics, automation in general is going to have on society. And the predictions very much are in the 30 to 70% of today's jobs that are either going to disappear or be massively impacted in the next 10 to 15 years, which includes my lifetime and career, probably yours, our kids, current learners and students in schools. And in the face of that, I started the Future You community so that the kinds of discussions that will be needed for all of us to figure this out can be happening. And really the ultimate why behind that is this idea that we don't want learners, which is all of us, as well as students, waiting around hoping that someone somewhere else will invent the jobs that they will need. Far better and safer approach would be to step beyond that and go, oh, hang on, why don't we just make sure that everybody has the skills they need to dream up their own futures, their own jobs, vocations, teams, and community projects? That's really the core goal behind the Future You community. Having the discussions, but also having the projects, kickstarting the projects that can help in this area. And very much the Future Literacies Framework comes into that. There are 5 areas, and I've done a lot of research, not to invent something new, but actually to step back far enough to see all the different bits and pieces that are happening already, and to pull them together into one framework where we can go, okay, here is the big picture. Sure, there's some great stuff happening in this area, and this area, but alone, those projects, as good as they are not going to give us enough to be able to thrive. So stepping back far enough to put together this framework, as I said, in about 2017 early, was a really big project, but since then there's been over 70 experts join from about 16 countries around the world, and we've been able to add and change this framework. So it's the kind of framework that's actually called a peer-reviewed framework, and what that means is that it changes over time based on the friendly, critical feedback of that community. We've added in extra elements, we've even swapped some of the literacies around, and it's an ever evolving. And if in, say, a year's time, it looks exactly the same as it does now, then I would say probably not doing our job. We haven't had enough discussions, and we haven't been invigorating the community enough around it. So let's have a look at the framework itself. As I mentioned, there are 5 of these future literacies, 5 that if you are able to be across these, you'll have that chance of inventing your own future. It's also not meant to be that you must be a master at all 5. It's never the intention. You might have a goal of getting across 3 of these. I think I'm across maybe 3.5 actually. But what the goal should be then is, okay, if I'm across my 3.5, I can find some teammates, start a project that involves other people who are across the other skills. But at least by having this framework in the first place, I know which ones I'm across and which ones I'm not. So we start with the idea of creativity. And most people understand why that is the first one. So creativity, one of those things that people talk about being something that can really set us apart in an age of automation and artificial intelligence. It's one of the things that is often talked about in this idea of, okay, well, what are the human intelligences? Not the artificial intelligences, but the human intelligences that can set us apart still in that the sort of future era that we're talking about. And so creativity has a whole bunch of sub-elements. They start with having a sense of play. And my background is a drama teacher, but all throughout my education career, whether that's been working in primary school all the way down to prep and kindergarten, high school, vocational education, and I've also taught in universities. And also workplaces, adult education, business education, and across all those, the one factor that I've found which is always relevant and will always improve learning is if you can engender a sense of play in the room, in the situation. And there are several ways of doing that, but really whichever way you start by doing that, the key thing is to engage that sense of playfulness, curiosity, and you can see as we work down here, dreaming as well, that these are the key kind of elements. And if you can get people into that sort of headspace, then the rest of the learning experience will always be much richer and much deeper. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time developing the First on Mars scenario as a way of getting people into this space. And you can contact me and ask more about that particular playful scenario. But let's keep working through here. So also very important in the creativity literacy, that creativity phase, is that you are able to fail, but then know how to keep iterating. There's a sense of persistence here, that you're firstly okay with failure. You don't see it as a finality, that we tried something, we stop. That there's a sense of iteration. That's a very important part in that creative process. It's something that design thinking addresses quite well and several other models. And you'll see that that's a reason why I've embedded some of those different ideas throughout this framework. We keep going, and of course resilience ties into that idea of being okay with failure, and the persistence that you have that sense of being able to come back to that. And this is one of the ones that was added probably about 9-10 months ago from a discussion with one of our early supporters whose school had a resilience program. And I sort of went, oh, okay, well, resilience it's a truly important part of the skill set. Whether you're a student or whether you're an adult, where does that fit in? And it was unanimous that actually it plugs in to support this creativity framework really well. Okay, you're probably quite familiar with the growth mindset. It's something that's been talked about for a number of years now. Has many supporters and great programs out there in education, but in other areas of society as well. The idea that actually let's just not think in the older ways, negative ways, but let's be positive, be proactive, and think about what are the positive future options. There's a follow-on from growth mindset as well. We've only just added into the framework called a benefit mindset, and the benefit mindset goes one step beyond that. I can't explain in depth each of these sub-elements. That might be something that you want to jump into after watching this video in terms of understanding what are all these sub-elements. There might be some that pop out to you more than others that you want to investigate, and that would definitely be a really interesting one I'd recommend. Okay, at this point, deferring judgment is very important. Now, we have had people say, oh, hang on a second, what about critical feedback, looking at things in the critical mindset? And that is actually a very important skill, obviously. But at this point, when we're talking about an earlier creative mindset, it's actually more important, from my experience, that you have a period of being able to defer judgment. That this is a time where, in the classic, no idea is a bad idea. And that's very true in this phase. So you need to be prepared to just be able to stop, give a lot more leeway for ideas and a flux at this stage. Be comfortable even with that kind of process is an important skill. And that kind of leads into the idea of the big picture, divergent thinking. Again, that you're actually okay and comfortable to put aside some of the more mechanical kind of planning steps, which may be important later, but right in this sort of phase, you're able to put those aside and understand about letting things just sit and percolate. That's really where we're at with this creativity literacy. Of course, once you're able to be in that space and dream a bit, you've got the sense of play happening, the curiosity, all these different elements, then you're able to move on to what we call our community literacy. And this is actually one that across all the different frameworks addressing future skills that I find generally is missing, is really not addressed. And it's this idea of relationships. And kind of the whole reason that, a society exists, in my opinion, is that not because we just are separate individuals who live our own separate lives, which of course we don't at all. It's really about the relationships. We have a society, we have our connections, and improving those and improving each other's lives, contributing to each other, having a richer experience in our lives is such a big drive of what we will need, not just now, but especially even more so into the future if we are having to learn how to work with AI and machines. I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny even and importance placed on what are those, as I was saying before, the human intelligences. And community and relationships is very much that. So one of the key factors in there, and you may be looking through the framework yourself and ticking off some of these as you go, thinking, yes, I feel confident I'm already across that one. So please do that. Get a copy of the framework from our website and go through and tick them off as you go. So that for you might be user-centered design. Now that's a term from the software development world, but user-centered design really means that you're able to look at a community. We use the word user, but we're really talking about your fellow community members and understand where are they coming from, what's important to them. If I'm going to start thinking about solutions to help my community and designing those solutions, I need to have that user-centered mindset. And of course, that leads perfectly into the idea of empathy, being able to put yourself, as we said, into somebody else's shoes, understand where they're actually coming from. Okay, we keep going down with the classic idea of teamwork, collaboration, and coordination. And there are some subtle differences there. And we've had some great discussions actually in our community. And we have a regular every 2 weeks a radio show on Voice Ed Radio called Edunauts, where we unpack some of these sub-elements. So that would be another great place for you to go to get a bit of a deeper dive into unpacking these sub-elements. But obviously, if you're going to come up with a solution for your community, it's not just going to be something that you work on by yourself and then try and deliver. You really want to be practicing that community in your own team and in your own group to be able to get to where you need to go. Okay, feedback, being able to give feedback, obviously important, but also being comfortable with receiving feedback is very important in this idea of relationships and community literacy. Okay, networking as well. So the idea, obviously, you'll have a small team, but for your team to really be able to succeed and contribute on a wider level, you're going to need to know how to connect and network in. Might be with other project teams, but it might be with leaders in particular fields who will be able to assist you and help you out as well. It means that you're seeking help, you know how to seek out help, but also you're able to give help back into your network. Okay, leadership. There are times when one person in a group has a particular set of skills and needs to step up and show some leadership. That doesn't mean they have to be the boss, as we say in our First on Mars workshops. You're not the boss, but you are the lead organizer at that point, knowing when to step up and step back. Global citizens, and this has been a very key one that some of our members have suggested. And again, it's that idea of the big picture perspective, that I'm thinking about my community, which might be quite small. It might be a small town, a small grouping of people with common interests that I'm seeking to help and connect with. But at the same time, we always still have that global perspective. And in the Future You community, we often refer to the overview effect, which is the more scientific study that's been done into astronauts and the impact that going into space and seeing our planet, the whole entirety of everything that is humans, just in that one planet, that impact that experience has had on astronauts. It's called the overview effect. And very much that aligns with this idea of global citizens, that we keep in mind those global things and what actually ties our global community together. And lastly, a very recent addition is this idea of civility. And there are times in heated discussions, etc., where we will be very passionate about one particular topic, and you can obviously drift into a bit of a black and white situation. This is a somewhat human thing to do, but at all times we really encourage that the community literacy maintains this idea of civility, that we have civil discourse, civil discussions, where you keep the respect at all times. And that is a very key foundation then, I guess, even within your little team, your project, that you're actually committed to that, but also in the wider discussions as well. Okay, so once you're able to think creatively and be a part of a community, but also be understanding a community, its problems and what might be needing, from here you can move on to the hardest set of skills, which we refer to as the thinking skills, or thinking and planning skills. And it's under this literacy that we look at things like the critical thinking and reflection. So we said before under creativity that there was a stage of having a much more open mindset, divergent thinking. But once we get to this stage, we're now starting to get to the point of, okay, I need the harder skills. I need to do some of the harder thinking. And this is where the critical reflection, we've got these understandings of our community now, but let's actually apply a bit more rigor to what we're going to do. And that might involve actually taking on some design or planning practices. Now, we mentioned design thinking. That has a great bunch of, especially around the iterative design process, bunch of great resources. Agile practices, again from the business software world, is something that gives you a lot of planning techniques, especially for teams, and works fantastic in a visual way. This is very much the time to start learning those kind of skills and plugging them into your team. And as we said, it's time for the convergent thinking. We did the divergent. You need to be able to operate in that space, but at some point, which is kind of here in the scheme of the literacies, you need to be able to plug in the convergent thinking. Okay, we've also got some other thinking styles. Now, a lot of schools are doing coding and putting a lot of emphasis on how that will be enough almost to prepare kids for the future. But I have a bit of a challenge to that, because I'm quite aware of apps and software that can actually write its own code already. And so the idea of, if myself know how to code, I'll be fine, that's a little bit of an iffy one. Certainly there is a huge number of coding positions and computer science positions. There are a lot of jobs in that area at the moment. Whether that'll still be the case in 10 to 15 years, who knows? But behind that, we need to look at, okay, well, what are the skills, the bigger picture skills? Let's step back for a minute from coding. And it's also called computational thinking. And I remember from the coding that I did when I was in school, that actually the best thing I took away from that was the logical thinking. So learning, firstly, just basic logic of, if this happens, then that, or that kind of chain thinking of logical thinking is something which I've then carried on and been able to apply and use in many other ways. It also helps me understand the way my technology works, and that it's also operating under these kind of basic principles. So when something goes wrong, I've got that thinking skill to fall back on. It's also important to understand that in this thinking skills, as I mentioned, plug in agile, plug in design thinking, plug in computational thinking, coding, logic. There are other thinking styles that also can just be plugged into this particular framework. I'd encourage you to do that as well. I don't have room to list all of them, and you may already be doing something fantastic with your organization in this area. Don't throw that out and put in something that I may have mentioned. The framework is very much meant to be, okay, here's the big picture, but also let's plug in the things we're already doing so that we get the most use out of that. Okay, so now we've got those thinking skills. We understand our community and we're thinking creatively. We can move on to the phase of, I've got a solution that we want to deliver. So we've gone through all these processes, and now it's kind of the rubber hits the road. We want to have some impact in our community, in our wider world. To be able to do that means being able to plan and deliver the real world projects. It's great, as I said, to have that real brainstorming, dreaming kind of phase. But if you're going to make a difference in your community and also thrive yourself in the kind of future that we've been talking about, you need to understand concepts like the sustainability. So sustainability, often we're talking about environment when we use that word, but it definitely has a wider application as well, in the sense of your solution, your ideas for your community. Can that be sustained? Is it something that's going to be able to continue over time? Is it going to be able to support itself? either by direct funding, maybe, but maybe there's a bartering system that your community would set up, or maybe there's some completely different way, volunteer time, whatever it is, that your project can be sustainable. Of course, that might lead directly into a business or entrepreneur type area, even intrapreneur inside an organization. And that may be that you're developing a product and get funding selling products. You need to have that sense that really underpins that sustainability as well. But as I said, there may be other ways your business could be, so your project or your business could be sustainable as well. Also on this project delivery, I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the idea of challenge-based learning. Okay, so that's a project-based learning approach which has a specific model, which I've always found very effective in that it ends with publication or production. It's not just a project that we do, for instance, if you're in a school that you do and your teacher sees it and maybe your classmates see it and maybe your parent, but that's it. Challenge-based learning, it has a great series of steps which lead you to that actual production publication type stage. And of course, as we mentioned down the bottom here, you may have other tools, other focuses. Perhaps your organization has a STEM focus or a literacy focus. Whatever it is that you already have as a focus around, okay, what are we trying to deliver? What does our business or our organization exist for? Plug that into this particular phase. Okay, let's move on to the very last one now, and it's called storytelling. Now, storytelling is another one of those areas that is often left out of the future skills frameworks from other organizations that are often quite a bit smaller in scope. However, it's vitally important because it doesn't matter if you have a great solution, you're a creative thinker, you understand your community, you've got everything in place, but nobody knows about it, then you're kind of in a tricky place. So storytelling comes in as very crucial at this stage. Naturally, once you start to think about this framework, you'll understand that many of these elements are actually mixed together at different phases. But for the purposes of understanding it initially, we've laid it out in this 5 phases type approach. Now, storytelling is this idea now that you've got your solution, but you have to be able to communicate it, explain it to the people who are going to benefit from it, explain it to the people who possibly buy in to your solution. So that's where this idea of sharing the solutions via a story comes in. Now, as I said, it covers communication, so that could be something as simple as the emails and messages that you do, but still that you have an understanding of this is the story that we're telling, and your communication strategy flows from there, your branding with logos, those kinds of things, design in general, even the videos that you create are coming back to what is our key story, why does this solution exist? All that can be summarized with the idea of content creation, and content creation is a skill that if you're across that, as new media is developed over time, you retain that core storytelling skill to be able to benefit your project and team. Could be marketing. Marketing is maybe more the commercial side of storytelling, but all of these things weave together to make sure that your solution is understood and welcomed and celebrated and becomes what it needs to be. So that's our summary of the Future Literacies Framework. Thanks for watching along as we went through each of those phases. As I said, I'd really encourage you to contribute. There's our website for the Future Literacies. Jump in there, join into the community and the discussions as well. And I look forward to your contributions. Cheers.